Marcus, the vampire king, stared at his phone as the doctor's words sank in. She says the baby is yours. But Elena had sworn their marriage was over, their bloodlines incompatible. Until he heard the infant's cry through the speaker, a sound that made every vampire in the city lift their heads in recognition. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Aldrich's penthouse office as he leaned forward across the mahogany conference table, his pale fingers tracing territorial boundaries on the holographic map suspended between him and the European vampire lords. The clock on his desk read 3:17 a.m., the perfect hour for conducting business with creatures who had not seen sunlight in centuries. Lord Bathory's aristocratic voice crackled through the speakers as he gestured at disputed feeding grounds in Prague, his ancient accent thick with centuries of entitlement. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as the conversation devolved into the same petty squabbles that had plagued vampire politics for millennia, each lord more concerned with preserving their piece of a shrinking world than adapting to the modern age. The soft blue glow of the hologram cast shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the exhaustion that even vampire stamina could not entirely erase after 8 months of ruling alone. He had built this empire from nothing, transformed scattered vampire houses into a unified territory that stretched across 3 states, and yet tonight he felt the weight of every decision, every compromise, every necessary evil that had brought him to this glass tower overlooking a sleeping city. The phone on his desk buzzed once, a harsh intrusion that made him glance at the caller ID with mild irritation. St. Mary's Hospital. Marcus almost declined the call, assuming it was another request for charitable donations or some administrative matter that his assistant could handle in the morning. But something about the late hour made him pause the conference and answer with practiced politeness. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the speaker with clinical urgency that made his enhanced senses snap to attention like a predator detecting prey. She said the baby is yours. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, each syllable carrying impossible weight that threatened to shatter 8 months of carefully constructed emotional barriers. Elena. The name echoed through his mind as the European lords continued their argument in the background, their voices fading to meaningless noise as the doctor continued speaking about emergency cesarean sections and complications, and a baby girl who was somehow, impossibly, his. 8 months ago, Elena had walked out of his life with tears streaming down her face, and her hand pressed protectively over a stomach that showed no sign of pregnancy, her voice breaking as she insisted that their love was beautiful but doomed, that vampires and humans could never create life together, that she refused to become another casualty of his supernatural world. She had researched the science, consulted with medical experts and supernatural scholars alike, all of whom confirmed what vampire lore had stated for millennia. Their bloodlines were incompatible, their union sterile, their love destined to burn bright and brief like a shooting star across an endless night. Marcus had let her go because he loved her too much to cage her, because he believed she deserved a normal life with someone who could give her the family she craved, because he had convinced himself that 3 years of happiness was more than creatures like him deserved. Now Dr. Chen was explaining that Elena was hemorrhaging, that the baby's vital signs were unlike anything the medical staff had ever encountered, that she was asking for him specifically despite having no emergency contact information in her file. Marcus disconnected the conference call without explanation, ignoring the indignant protests from the European lords as he grabbed his coat and keys, his vampire speed allowing him to reach the elevator before his rational mind could process what he was doing. The parking garage echoed with the roar of his Aston Martin as he tore through the rain-soaked streets of downtown, his supernatural hearing already picking up the subtle vibrations that indicated his kind were stirring across the city like wolves responding to a distant howl. Traffic lights blurred past in streams of red and yellow as he wove between late-night delivery trucks and taxicabs, the speedometer climbing past numbers that would have been suicidal for human reflexes, but felt sluggish against the urgency clawing at his chest. Mary's hospital loomed ahead through the storm, its white walls gleaming like a beacon against the dark sky, and Marcus could already sense the wrongness emanating from the building like heat from a fire. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered vehicles belonging to night shift workers, but Marcus could feel them watching from the shadows, his vampire brethren drawn by whatever supernatural signature was broadcasting from within those sterile walls. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whisper as he strode into the fluorescent brightness of the emergency department, his enhanced vision immediately adjusting to pick out every detail from the coffee stains on the reception desk to the nervous tremor in the duty nurse's hands as she recognized something predatory in his approach. Dr. Chen appeared before he could speak, a small Asian woman in her 50s whose surgical scrubs bore evidence of recent crisis and whose dark eyes held the kind of professional calm that came from years of dealing with medical impossibilities. She led him through a maze of corridors that smelled of antiseptic and human fear, her voice a steady stream of medical terminology that his supernatural mind catalogued even as his heart hammered with very human anxiety. Elena was unconscious when he reached her bedside, her face pale against the white hospital sheets and her breathing shallow beneath the tangle of monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed around her like electronic prayers. The sight of her stopped him cold. Memories flooding back of morning coffee in bed and stolen weekend getaways, and the way she used to trace patterns on his chest while asking about vampire history, as if his centuries of existence were bedtime stories instead of testimonies to violence and survival. Dr. Chen was explaining the complications, the blood loss, the emergency surgery that had saved Elena's life, but left the medical team with more questions than answers, when a sound from the adjacent room cut through her words like a blade through silk. The cry was soft at first, barely audible beneath the hospital's ambient noise, but it carried harmonics that made every vampire in the city lift their heads in sudden recognition. Marcus felt his ancient instinct surge to life as the infant's voice rose and fell with cadences that spoke to genetic memories older than civilization, a primal song that called to something deep in his supernatural DNA. He moved toward the sound without conscious thought, his feet carrying him to the nursery, where a tiny figure lay swaddled in pink blankets beneath warming lights that cast her in an ethereal glow. This was his daughter. The knowledge hit him with the force of revelation as he gazed down at features that blended Elena's delicate bone structure with his own patrician nose and the sharp angles that marked his bloodline. Her eyes opened as he approached, shifting between warm human brown and the silver gleam that marked vampires in their natural state. And Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his chest, as if his heart was remembering how to beat after centuries of mechanical function. Dr. Chen appeared beside him with a tablet full of test results that defied medical explanation, her voice dropping to a whisper as she outlined the impossible statistics that marked his daughter as something beyond human classification. Heart rate varying between normal infant ranges and supernatural levels. Body temperature fluctuating in patterns that suggested metabolic flexibility unknown to medical science. Blood chemistry that showed markers for both human hemoglobin and the modified proteins that allowed vampires to process their liquid diet. She was a hybrid, a bridge between worlds that vampire lore claimed could not exist. And her very presence was sending ripples through the supernatural community, like sonar pulses drawing predators to their location. Elena stirred as they returned to her bedside, her brown eyes opening with the unfocused confusion of someone emerging from medical sedation before sharpening with the fierce protectiveness that Marcus remembered from their time together. "I left to protect her from your world," she whispered through cracked lips, her hand instinctively reaching toward the nursery despite her weakness, and Marcus understood that she had known about the pregnancy, had carried their child in secret while he grieved their separation, had given birth alone because she believed his supernatural nature would damn their daughter to a life of danger and isolation. The revelation stung like a physical blow, even as he recognized the love behind her deception, the maternal instinct that had driven her to sacrifice their relationship for their child's supposed safety. Elena's eyes widened as she saw him, emotions cycling across her face too quickly for even his enhanced perception to catalog completely. Fear and relief and desperate love warring with the knowledge that their secret was no longer safe. Marcus felt the subtle vibrations that indicated other vampires were converging on the hospital, drawn by their daughter's supernatural signature like moths to flame, and he realized that they had perhaps minutes before the delicate illusion of normalcy shattered completely. The ancient laws were clear about hybrid children, carved in blood and tradition by vampires who had ruled for millennia without challenge to their genetic purity. Such offspring were either abominations to be destroyed before they could threaten the established order, or chosen heirs, whose mixed heritage could theoretically unite all supernatural bloodlines under one ruler. There was no middle ground, no peaceful coexistence, no option for his daughter to simply grow up human and safe, as Elena had desperately hoped. The Vampire Council's enforcers would arrive before dawn, drawn by duty and law to investigate the supernatural anomaly that every vampire in the city could now sense. And Marcus would be forced to choose between his crown and his family, between the empire he had built and the love he thought he had lost forever. Elena's hand found his as these thoughts raced through his mind, her touch still carrying the electric connection that had first drawn them together, despite every logical argument against their union, and Marcus felt his resolve crystallizing into diamond-hard determination. His daughter would not become another casualty of vampire politics, another sacrifice to traditions that valued purity over progress, and if protecting her meant going to war with his own kind, then he would paint the city red with ancient blood. The rain continued to drum against the hospital windows as Marcus squeezed Elena's hand and gazed at their sleeping child, both of them knowing that dawn would bring challenges that could shatter their world or forge something entirely new from the wreckage of what came before. The ambulance that arrived at St. Mary's Hospital bore no identifying marks and answered to no emergency dispatch service, its sleek black exterior and tinted windows marking it as one of Marcus's private medical transports designed for supernatural emergencies that human hospitals could never adequately address. Dr. Chen watched with professional curiosity tinged with unease as Marcus's hand-picked medical team transferred Elena and baby Arya with equipment that seemed decades ahead of anything in the hospital's inventory, their movements precise and efficient in ways that suggested extensive experience with unusual patients. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride through pre-dawn streets, her hand clutching the blanket that wrapped their daughter, while Marcus sat beside her, monitoring vital signs on displays that showed readings no human medical device could detect. The compound rose from the hills outside the city like a fortress of glass and steel, its modernist architecture concealing defensive systems that could repel everything from conventional military assault to supernatural incursion. And as they passed through multiple security checkpoints, Elena began to grasp the true scope of the world Marcus inhabited. The private medical wing rivaled the best hospitals she had ever seen, equipped with technology that bridged the gap between cutting-edge science and supernatural necessity. And Elena found herself settled in a recovery suite that offered panoramic views of the city lights while maintaining complete privacy from any outside observation. Baby Arya was installed in an adjacent nursery where specialized monitors tracked her unique physiology, with sensors designed specifically for hybrid detection. Her tiny form peaceful beneath warming lights that adjusted automatically to her fluctuating body temperature. Elena struggled with the growing realization that the normal life she had envisioned for their daughter was already impossible, that the moment Arya drew her first breath, she had entered a world where human laws and expectations held no authority, where her very existence challenged assumptions that supernatural beings had held for millennia. Marcus divided his time between coordinating security measures and sitting beside Elena's bed, his ancient features softened by wonder every time he looked at their daughter. And Elena could see him wrestling with emotions that his vampire nature had not prepared him to process. The first indication that their sanctuary was no longer secret came at sunset on their second day at the compound, when the perimeter sensors detected vehicles approaching with occupants whose heat signatures registered as notably cooler than human normal. Marcus tensed as his security chief reported the arrival through discreet communication channels, his enhanced hearing already picking up the formal cadences of supernatural speech patterns that indicated official business rather than random curiosity. Cassandra Blackthorne emerged from a limousine that gleamed like polished obsidian, her presence commanding immediate attention from every vampire in Marcus's employ, as they recognized one of the council elders whose authority stretched back through centuries of accumulated power. She was accompanied by two enforcers whose perfectly tailored suits could not disguise the predatory grace with which they moved, their eyes scanning the compound's defenses with professional assessment while maintaining the respectful distance that protocol demanded. Elena watched from the medical wing's observation deck as Marcus greeted his visitors in the main courtyard. The formal bowing and ceremonial phrases that marked vampire diplomacy seeming almost theatrical against the backdrop of modern architecture and security equipment. Cassandra's voice carried clearly through the evening air as she complimented Marcus on his compound's impressive defenses while making subtle inquiries about recent additions to his household, her tone maintaining perfect politeness while conveying unmistakable authority. The meeting moved to Marcus's glass-walled conference room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the city while ensuring that every gesture and expression remained visible to all participants. Transparency being a crucial element of vampire negotiations, where deception could prove fatal. Elena positioned herself in an adjacent room where security monitors allowed her to observe the proceedings while remaining technically absent from official vampire business, her heart hammering with very human anxiety as she watched Cassandra settle into her chair with the fluid grace of a predator claiming territory. Ancient protocols demanded that hybrid children be presented to the council within days of their birth, Cassandra explained with the patient tone of someone reciting well-established law. And while she appreciated Marcus's desire to ensure his child's health, certain supernatural signatures could not remain unexamined indefinitely. Marcus responded with careful diplomatic language about parental rights and the unique circumstances surrounding Arya's birth. But Elena could see the tension building in his shoulders as Cassandra's questions became increasingly specific about the baby's documented abilities and potential threats to vampire secrecy. The conversation took on the ritualized quality of legal proceedings as both vampires cited precedents and ancient rulings that Elena barely understood, but the underlying message was crystal clear. Arya's existence had upset balances that the Vampire Council existed to maintain. Elena caught fragments of discussion about bloodline purification and necessary sacrifices, terms that sent ice through her veins as she realized that her daughter's life was being debated like a political problem requiring solution rather than celebrated as a miracle of love transcending ancient boundaries. The tension in the conference room was reaching dangerous levels when baby Arya's cry echoed through the compound's intercom system, her distinctive voice carrying harmonics that made every vampire present freeze with sudden alertness. Cassandra rose from her chair with predatory interest, her ancient features sharpening as she requested permission to observe the child whose supernatural signature had drawn the council's attention. And Marcus found himself caught between his role as gracious host and his instincts as a protective father. Elena followed at a distance as the group moved toward the nursery, her maternal instincts screaming warnings that she forced herself to ignore in favor of maintaining the diplomatic facade that might protect them all. Cassandra approached the specialized crib where Arya slept beneath monitoring equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency, her expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching awe as she gazed down at the tiny figure whose existence challenged everything vampire science claimed to understand. Baby Arya stirred as the elder vampire leaned closer, her small eyes opening to reveal irises that shifted between human brown and supernatural silver like liquid metal responding to unseen currents. The moment Cassandra extended one perfectly manicured finger toward the baby's face, Arya's eyes blazed with silver light that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, and every electrical system in the compound flickered in response to some unknown energy surge that originated from the nursery. Emergency lighting activated automatically as the main power grid struggled to compensate for whatever interference Arya was generating, and the sophisticated monitoring equipment surrounding her crib began displaying readings that defied every parameter programmed into their systems. Cassandra stepped backward with supernatural speed as the lights continued to flicker, her composed expression cracking to reveal genuine surprise at encountering a hybrid whose abilities manifested so dramatically at such a young age. And Marcus realized that his daughter had just demonstrated powers that would make her either invaluable or incredibly dangerous to every supernatural faction. Elena rushed to the crib as the electrical disturbance subsided, her maternal instincts overriding diplomatic concerns as she gathered Arya into her arms and felt the baby's supernatural emanations calm in response to familiar contact. The nursery fell silent, except for the gradual resumption of normal equipment function and the sound of Cassandra's measured breathing as she processed what she had witnessed, her ancient mind already calculating the implications of a hybrid child whose mere emotional state could affect electronic systems. Marcus stood frozen between his roles as vampire king and protective father, knowing that Cassandra's report to the council would determine whether his family faced assassination or adoption into a political structure that would consume them all. The formal vampire council convened 3 nights later in the cathedral that had served as their meeting place since before the city's founding, its Gothic arches and stained glass windows providing appropriate atmosphere for deliberations that could reshape supernatural society. Marcus descended stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of vampire feet, his formal attire marking him as petitioner rather than peer, despite his territorial authority, while Elena remained at the compound, monitoring the proceedings through security feeds that his technical staff had discreetly installed throughout the ancient building. The council chamber itself was a study in contrasts, where medieval stone architecture housed modern communication equipment, allowing vampire lords from across the continent to participate via holographic projection while maintaining the ceremonial traditions that legitimized their authority. Marcus presented his case with the measured eloquence that had built his empire, arguing that Arya represented evolution rather than contamination, a bridge between worlds that could herald a new age of supernatural cooperation instead of the endless territorial conflicts that had defined vampire existence for millennia. His words echoed through the chamber with practiced conviction, but Elena could see the skeptical expressions on the projected faces of European lords who had spent centuries refining their prejudices against change. Opposition crystallized around Victor Dracul, whose ancient bloodline and territorial holdings made him Marcus's primary rival for continental influence, and whose aristocratic features twisted with disgust as he argued that hybrid children threatened the genetic purity that had allowed vampires to survive human persecution for thousands of years. Victor's voice carried the weight of tradition as he recited historical examples of supernatural crossbreeding that had led to disaster, his rhetoric painting Arya as an abomination whose very existence violated natural law and invited divine retribution. The debate raged through the night as council members cited precedents and ancient rulings, their voices rising and falling with the formal cadences of vampire politics, while Elena watched from her remote location and felt her heart breaking with each argument for her daughter's destruction. The ancient law was finally invoked by Cassandra herself, who stood before the assembled council and recited provisions that had governed hybrid births since the Dark Ages. her voice carrying absolute authority as she explained that such children must either be eliminated before their first full moon or formally acknowledged as heirs with complete supernatural protection. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the council was giving them 3 weeks to either surrender their daughter for execution or commit her to a life of supernatural politics that would consume her humanity before she could walk. The debate might have continued until dawn, except for an interruption that silenced every voice in the chamber and sent ripples of ancient fear through vampires whose courage had been forged in centuries of conflict. Lucian Morningstar emerged from shadows that seemed deeper than physical law allowed, his presence filling the cathedral with power that made the air itself feel heavier, as council members who had ruled for centuries suddenly found themselves in the presence of their maker's maker. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle as his sire materialized beside the council table, looking exactly as he had 3 centuries ago when he had granted Marcus the dark gift that elevated him from human mortality to vampire eternity. Lucian's voice carried harmonics that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the genetic memory encoded in every vampire's DNA, his words requiring no amplification to fill every corner of the cathedral as he announced his intention to personally judge the matter of Marcus's hybrid child. The ancient vampire's presence shifted the entire dynamic of the council session, as members who had seemed confident in their authority suddenly found themselves deferring to a being whose age and power predated their bloodlines by millennia. Elena watched in growing horror as 3 other vampire houses immediately claimed precedence rights over Arya, their representatives arguing that their territorial authority or genetic superiority gave them legitimate claims to study or adopt the hybrid child for their own purposes. House Bathory cited their expertise in supernatural genetics research. House Ravencroft claimed territorial authority over hybrid births within their ancient boundaries. House Nightshade argued that their bloodline's connection to witch magic made them ideal guardians for a child whose abilities bridged multiple supernatural realms. Marcus found himself surrounded by political predators who saw his daughter not as a person, but as a resource to be acquired, studied, and exploited for advantages in the endless games of supernatural politics that had consumed vampire society since its inception. Lucian raised one pale hand, and the chamber fell silent, as every vampire present felt the weight of ancient authority pressing down upon them like a physical force. His announcement that he would personally evaluate the hybrid child within the week sent shockwaves through the assembled council members, who realized that their carefully planned political maneuvering had suddenly become irrelevant in the face of their progenitor's direct intervention. Elena disconnected from the security feed as the session devolved into frantic negotiations between houses seeking to position themselves favorably for whatever judgment Lucienne might render, her mind reeling with the knowledge that her daughter had become the center of supernatural attention that stretched across continents and centuries. Marcus returned to the compound before dawn with his expression set in lines of grim determination. Knowing that the week ahead would determine whether his family survived intact or became casualties in ancient conflicts that predated human civilization itself. Lucian Morningstar arrived at Marcus's compound on the 7th night after the council session, his ancient presence announced not by security systems, but by the sudden silence that fell across every living thing within a 5-mile radius, as if nature itself held its breath in the presence of something older than recorded history. Elena watched from the medical wing as Marcus's most elite guards stepped aside without challenge, their vampire instincts recognizing authority that transcended any earthly hierarchy, while Lucian moved through the compound's defenses like shadows flowing through moonlight. The ancient vampire entered the nursery where baby Arya slept, beneath monitoring equipment that registered his approach with readings that defied every parameter in their databases, electromagnetic fields fluctuating wildly as his presence interacted with forces that human science had no framework to understand. Elena felt her breath catch as Lucian leaned over their daughter's crib, his features carved from marble and moonlight, showing no emotion as he studied the tiny figure whose existence had summoned him from centuries of contemplative isolation. Arya stirred as if sensing the weight of ancient attention focused upon her, her small eyes opening to reveal irises that shifted between human brown and vampire silver before settling into something entirely new. A luminous gold that seemed to contain depths of wisdom impossible in an infant barely 2 weeks old. Lucian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as their eyes met, some communication passing between them that required no words, and Elena realized she was witnessing a moment that would be remembered for as long as supernatural beings walked the earth. The ancient vampire straightened with fluid grace that spoke of power accumulated across millennia, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the building's very structure as he began to speak of prophecies carved in stone before human civilization learned to write. The truth he revealed shattered every assumption Marcus and Elena had made about their daughter's significance, transforming her from an impossible miracle into something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. Vampire and human hybrids had been prophesied to appear when supernatural worlds faced their greatest existential threat, Lucian explained with the patient tone of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, their births serving as harbingers of either unprecedented unity among supernatural species or total destruction of the hidden world that had existed alongside humanity for thousands of years. Ancient texts spoke of a bridge-born child, whose mixed heritage would either forge connections between enemies who had warred since the dawn of time, or become the catalyst for a final conflict that would expose all supernatural beings to human discovery and inevitable annihilation. Elena felt the walls of reality shifting around her as Lucian's words rewrote everything she thought she understood about her daughter's place in the world, transforming Arya from a personal miracle into a cosmic fulcrum upon which the fate of entire species balanced. The power flip was complete and devastating in its implications, as Marcus realized that his paternal instincts to protect his family were now inextricably linked to decisions that could determine whether supernatural civilization survived or crumbled into extinction. Lucian continued his revelation with the methodical precision of someone cataloging historical facts, explaining that Elena herself was far more than the human medical researcher she believed herself to be, her bloodline carrying genetic markers that had been deliberately hidden through generations of careful breeding and magical concealment. Her grandmother had been a powerful witch who had bound their family line to remain undetectable to supernatural senses until the prophesied time arrived, sacrificing her own magical abilities to ensure that her descendants could live normal human lives while carrying the genetic potential necessary to birth the bridge-born child. Elena's hands trembled as memories suddenly took on new significance. Childhood stories her grandmother had told about their family's special destiny, unexplained incidents where electronic devices malfunctioned around her during emotional stress, the intuitive understanding of people's motivations that had made her such an effective researcher. The magical binding that had hidden her true nature was unraveling now that Arya had been born, awakening abilities that had been suppressed for decades, while supernatural forces that had been searching for the prophesied bloodline finally detected their location. The stakes exploded beyond anything Marcus had imagined as Lucian revealed that vampire politics were merely the first wave of attention that Arya's birth would attract, her supernatural signature broadcasting across dimensional boundaries to species that had remained hidden even from vampire knowledge. Werewolf packs were already mobilizing across 3 states, their alpha leaders receiving visions that spoke of a child whose blood could either cure their monthly torment or bind them permanently to their wolf forms, depending on how her power was channeled. Witch covens that had maintained neutrality for centuries were convening emergency councils to debate whether the bridge-born child represented salvation or damnation for magical practitioners whose abilities had been declining with each generation. Fallen angels who had been banished from celestial realms were stirring from eons of exile, sensing an opportunity to either reclaim their former glory or ensure that no other supernatural being could achieve the unity that had been denied to them. Elena struggled to process the revelation that her daughter was not simply a vampire-human hybrid, but a living nexus, whose very existence would draw every supernatural faction into conflict over the right to control or destroy her. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling upon his shoulders as he understood that his decisions as a father would ripple through every supernatural community, potentially determining whether ancient enemies found common ground or destroyed each other in their desperate attempts to claim or eliminate the bridge-born child. Lucian's presence filled the nursery with power that made the air itself feel electric as he leaned closer to study Arya's sleeping form, his ancient features showing the first hint of emotion Elena had detected since his arrival. The baby's unusual golden eyes opened again as if responding to his scrutiny, and for a moment the room filled with harmonics that registered on frequencies beyond human hearing, a communication between beings whose understanding transcended normal sensory experience. When Lucian straightened, his expression carried the weight of someone who had seen the threads of fate converging toward a moment that could not be avoided or delayed, only faced with whatever courage supernatural beings could muster in the face of prophecy made manifest. His announcement that multiple supernatural species were already converging on the city transformed Marcus's compound from a sanctuary into the epicenter of conflicts that had been brewing since the dawn of supernatural civilization. Werewolf scouts had been detected within 50 miles of the compound, their pack loyalty temporarily overridden by alpha commands to locate and evaluate the bridge-born child before rival packs could claim territorial advantage. Witch covens were establishing temporary bases in abandoned buildings throughout the metropolitan area, their magical workings creating interference patterns that Marcus's technical staff registered as unexplained electromagnetic anomalies. Fallen angels were manifesting in forms that human eyes interpreted as particularly charismatic individuals who moved through the city's power structures with influence that seemed to accumulate without apparent effort or explanation. Elena realized that the normal world she had tried to preserve for their daughter was dissolving around them as supernatural forces that had remained hidden for millennia began positioning themselves for a confrontation that would determine the future of all non-human species. Marcus found himself at the center of political machinations that stretched across dimensional boundaries. His role as vampire king, suddenly insignificant compared to his position as father to a child whose allegiances could tip the balance of supernatural power forever. The ancient prophecy that Lucian had revealed was already beginning to fulfill itself, as reports reached the compound of supernatural activity spiking across the continent, dormant bloodlines awakening to ancient callings, and neutral factions choosing sides in preparation for conflicts that most had hoped would never come. Elena watched her sleeping daughter and tried to imagine what kind of life awaited a child whose first breath had triggered prophetic warnings that stretched back to the foundation of supernatural civilization, whose innocent existence would force ancient enemies to either find unprecedented cooperation or destroy themselves in wars that could expose their hidden world to human discovery. Marcus stood beside Lucian in the nursery where their daughter slept peacefully, despite the cosmic forces gathering around her, both vampires understanding that the quiet moments they were sharing might be the last peace any of them experienced for years to come. The ancient vampire's final words before departing carried the weight of absolute prophecy as he explained that Arya's third month of life would bring the convergence that supernatural seers had foreseen for millennia, when all factions would be forced to declare their intentions and the bridge-born child would begin manifesting the abilities that would either unite or destroy every supernatural species on Earth. Elena felt tears she had not realized she was crying as she understood that her daughter's childhood would be consumed by forces beyond any parent's ability to control. That every smile and laugh and milestone would occur under scrutiny from beings whose survival might depend on the choices a growing child would make. Marcus closed his eyes and felt the full weight of fatherhood settling upon his shoulders like a crown forged from responsibility and love, knowing that protecting his family now meant navigating political currents that could drown civilizations in their undertow. The compound's security systems registered new arrivals throughout the night as supernatural beings began gathering in the city like pieces moving into position for a game whose rules had been written in prophecies older than human memory. And Marcus realized that his quiet life as a vampire king ruling a peaceful territory had ended the moment his daughter drew her first breath and announced to every supernatural being on Earth that the bridge-born child had finally arrived. The first assault came at 3:15 in the morning when Marcus's perimeter sensors detected movement patterns that defied human capability, shadows flowing across the compound's grounds with the coordinated precision of military units trained in supernatural warfare. Elena jerked awake in the medical wing as emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red, while automated systems sealed blast doors and activated defensive measures that transformed Marcus's elegant home into an impenetrable fortress. Through reinforced windows, she could see figures moving with inhuman speed across the manicured lawns, their heat signatures registering on security monitors as notably cooler than human normal, while their movements suggested predatory coordination that spoke of pack-hunting instincts refined across centuries of survival. Marcus appeared in the nursery doorway with supernatural speed, his formal attire replaced by tactical gear that revealed the warrior he had been before politics and empire-building claimed his attention. His ancient features set in lines of grim determination as he coordinated defensive responses through wireless communication with his security teams. The werewolf pack struck first with the brutal efficiency of apex predators, their alpha leader directing coordinated attacks against the compound's weakest points, while younger pack members created diversions designed to spread Marcus's forces thin across multiple fronts. Witch covens followed with magical assaults that bypassed physical defenses entirely, their workings creating interference patterns that disrupted electronic systems and opened gaps in the compound's supernatural shielding for more direct attacks. Fallen angels manifested in forms that registered as electromagnetic anomalies on human sensors, their presence corrupting the very air around them as they tested the boundaries of Marcus's territorial authority with power that predated vampire civilization by eons. Elena found herself standing beside Arya's crib as explosions echoed through the compound's reinforced structure, her maternal instincts screaming warnings while something deeper awakened in response to the threats surrounding her daughter. The protective barriers that suddenly shimmered into existence around the nursery were invisible to normal sight, but registered on supernatural senses as walls of pure force that deflected magical attacks and created safe zones where Arya could sleep peacefully, despite the chaos erupting throughout the building. Elena stared at her own hands in wonder and terror as she realized that abilities suppressed by generations of magical binding were finally manifesting. Her grandmother's bloodline awakening to protect the bridge-born child who represented both their family's destiny and the supernatural world's potential salvation or destruction. The barriers she instinctively created pulsed with harmonics that seemed to resonate with Arya's own supernatural emanations, mother and daughter, working in unconscious coordination to deflect attacks from beings whose power could level city blocks if focused with malicious intent. Marcus fought through corridors that had become war zones as supernatural factions tested his defenses with increasing desperation, each group seeking either to claim or eliminate the child whose existence threatened to upset ancient balances that had maintained their hidden world for millennia. His vampire speed and strength allowed him to hold defensive positions that would have been impossible for human forces. But even his enhanced abilities were being pushed to their limits by coordinated attacks from enemies who had been planning this assault since Arya's birth first registered on their supernatural senses. The betrayal came from within, as Dr. Chen's voice echoed through the compound's communication system. Her medical expertise suddenly revealed as cover for intelligence-gathering operations that had been monitoring Marcus's activities since Elena first appeared at St. Mary's Hospital. Federal agents materialized from concealment positions they had maintained for weeks. Their specialized equipment, designed specifically for containing supernatural entities, while their tactical coordination spoke of extensive training in dealing with threats that official government agencies refused to acknowledge existed. Elena watched in horror through security monitors as unmarked vehicles surrounded the compound's perimeter, their occupants deploying containment devices that projected electromagnetic fields designed to disrupt vampire nervous systems and neutralize supernatural abilities through technological means that bridged the gap between science and magic. Dr. Maker Chen's betrayal cut deeper than enemy attacks, as Elena realized that the woman who had delivered their daughter and provided crucial medical support had been reporting every detail of Arya's unique physiology to government researchers whose interest in supernatural genetics bordered on obsession. The federal operation represented a threat that even ancient vampire politics had not prepared them to face. Human technology directed by scientific minds that viewed supernatural beings as subjects for study rather than individuals deserving of basic rights or protections. Marcus found himself caught between ancient laws that forbade vampire aggression against human authorities and paternal instincts that demanded he protect his family, regardless of the political consequences that might follow. Fighting federal agents would violate treaties that had kept vampires hidden from human discovery for centuries, potentially exposing his entire species to government scrutiny that could lead to systematic persecution or worse. Surrendering Arya to government containment meant condemning their daughter to a life of scientific experimentation that would treat her unique abilities as phenomena to be dissected rather than gifts to be nurtured and protected. Elena made the choice that would reshape their lives forever, as she activated the emergency communication system that connected directly to Cassandra Blackthorne's private channels, her voice carrying desperate determination as she proposed a bargain that would bind her fate to vampire politics in exchange for absolute protection for their daughter. She would submit to vampire transformation if the council agreed to recognize Arya as a legitimate heir deserving of full supernatural protection, trading her humanity for the political alliance that could shield their family from both government interference and rival supernatural factions. Cassandra's response came with the lightning speed of someone who had been anticipating exactly this development, her agreement carrying contractual weight that bound the Vampire Council to defend Arya against all threats, while Elena underwent the dangerous transformation process that few humans survived intact. Marcus felt his world tilting as Elena announced her decision, with the calm finality of someone who had weighed impossible choices and selected the only option that offered their daughter a chance at survival. The transformation process began immediately as Cassandra's medical specialists arrived with equipment designed for converting humans to vampire physiology, their expertise representing centuries of accumulated knowledge about the delicate procedures required to grant immortality without destroying the subject's essential humanity. Elena lay on the medical table where she had recovered from childbirth just weeks earlier, now preparing to die as a human in order to be reborn as something that could protect their daughter from forces that mortal flesh could never hope to resist. Marcus held her hand as vampire physicians explained the risks inherent in transforming someone so soon after giving birth. The physical stress of recent pregnancy combining with transformation trauma to create survival odds that even optimistic estimates placed below 50%. The procedure itself required precise timing as vampire blood was introduced to her system in carefully measured doses, each injection triggering biological changes that would either grant her immortal strength or kill her, as her human physiology rejected modifications it was never designed to accommodate. Elena's vital signs fluctuated wildly on monitoring equipment as her cardiovascular system adapted to processing vampire blood, while her nervous system underwent rewiring that would grant enhanced senses and supernatural speed at the cost of vulnerabilities that included fatal sensitivity to sunlight and complete dependence on blood for nutrition. Marcus watched helplessly as the woman he loved struggled through a transformation that pushed her body beyond every limit of human endurance, her survival dependent on genetic factors that even vampire science could not predict with certainty. The surveillance footage that Marcus's security chief brought to his attention during Elena's transformation revealed betrayals that cut deeper than government interference or supernatural politics, showing Victor Dracul in secret conference with werewolf alphas, whose territorial ambitions aligned perfectly with his desire to eliminate Marcus's bloodline permanently. The alliance between vampire houses and werewolf packs represented cooperation between species that had been enemies since the dawn of supernatural civilization, their shared hatred of Marcus's growing influence overcoming ancient prejudices in service of mutual goals. Victor's plan involved coordinating simultaneous attacks that would overwhelm the compound's defenses, while government forces provided convenient cover for supernatural violence that could be attributed to human military action rather than vampire politics. The werewolf alphas brought numbers and savage efficiency, while Victor contributed strategic intelligence about the compound's defensive weaknesses and the precise timing required to breach Marcus's inner sanctuary, where Arya slept under Elena's protective barriers. Marcus realized that his enemies had been planning this coordinated assault since the moment Arya's birth first registered on supernatural senses, using the chaos of multiple faction conflicts to disguise their true objective of eliminating the bridge-born child before her prophesied abilities could manifest fully. The compound's defenses began failing as supernatural attacks intensified beyond the capacity of even Marcus's sophisticated security systems to repel, automated weapons proving inadequate against enemies who could phase through solid matter or redirect electronic targeting systems through magical interference. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as blast doors designed to withstand military-grade explosives buckled under impacts that registered on seismic sensors as localized earthquake activity, the building's reinforced structure groaning under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Marcus found himself fighting a retreat through corridors he had walked peacefully for decades, each defensive position abandoned as overwhelming force pushed his security teams back toward the medical wing, where Elena underwent transformation, while their daughter slept in supernatural innocence. The first signs of Arya's manifesting abilities came as violent supernatural entities approached the nursery and found themselves inexplicably calmed, their aggressive instincts dampening in her presence, as if her very existence projected peace that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the genetic memory encoded in every supernatural being's DNA. Werewolves who had been howling with battle fury fell silent as they entered her immediate vicinity, their pack coordination dissolving into individual confusion as ancient hunting instincts failed to function properly in proximity to the bridge-born child. Vampire attackers experienced similar disorientation as their predatory focus scattered, replaced by protective urges that made no logical sense but felt more compelling than any conscious directive their leaders might issue. Elena's vital signs flatlined on monitoring equipment just as Victor's forces breached the inner sanctuary, her human heart stopping as vampire blood completed its takeover of her circulatory system, while medical alarms shrieked warnings that echoed through corridors where Marcus fought desperately to reach his family before his enemies could claim or destroy them. The transformation process entered its most dangerous phase as Elena's body died and was reborn according to vampire physiology, her consciousness suspended between human mortality and supernatural immortality, while her survival depended on biological processes that medical science could monitor but not control. Marcus felt his own heart stop as Elena's monitors showed flatline readings, his vampire senses detecting the moment when her human life ended and something entirely new began struggling to take its place in a body that had already endured the tremendous stress of recent childbirth. Victor's triumphant laughter echoed through the compound's communication system as his forces overwhelmed the final defensive positions, his voice carrying centuries of accumulated hatred as he announced his intention to claim both the bridge-born child and her transformed mother as trophies to demonstrate his superiority over Marcus's bloodline. The sanctuary's blast doors sealed automatically as emergency protocols activated, buying precious minutes while Elena fought for survival on the boundary between life and death, her transformation balanced on the knife edge between miraculous rebirth and total system failure that would leave their daughter orphaned in a world that viewed her as either savior or destroyer, depending on which supernatural faction claimed authority over her prophesied destiny. The resurrection began with a gasp that echoed through the medical wing like thunder. Elena's eyes snapping open to reveal irises that blazed with silver fire, while her newly transformed body surged with power that merged vampire strength with the awakened witch bloodline her grandmother had bound to protect their family's secret destiny. Marcus felt his own heart restart as monitoring equipment registered vital signs that defied every parameter in their databases. Elena's physiology now reflecting the impossible fusion of three supernatural heritages working in perfect harmony, where medical science claimed only death should result. The transformation had not simply granted her vampire abilities, but had shattered the magical bindings that had suppressed her witch heritage for generations, releasing power that flowed through her like liquid starlight as she rose from the medical table with grace that spoke of supernatural strength tempered by human compassion. Elena's enhanced senses immediately detected the supernatural signatures converging throughout the compound as Victor's forces pressed their assault, her newly awakened magical sight revealing the true scope of enemies who had gathered to claim or destroy their daughter while she fought between life and death. She moved through the corridors with fluid speed that matched Marcus's vampire abilities while projecting protective barriers that deflected supernatural attacks with efficiency that spoke of instinctive understanding rather than learned technique. Elena found herself standing beside Arya's crib, where their daughter slept peacefully, despite the chaos erupting around them, her small form radiating an innocence that seemed impossibly fragile against the cosmic forces gathering to determine her fate. The protective barriers Elena projected around the nursery now pulsed with combined vampire and witch power, creating sanctuary space that registered on supernatural senses as neutral territory where ancient enmities temporarily lost their compelling urgency. Marcus joined them in the sanctuary as emergency protocols sealed the medical wing, his expression shifting between relief at Elena's survival and wonder at the transformation that had elevated her from human vulnerability to supernatural power that complemented his own abilities perfectly. Together they represented a formidable defensive force, as Elena's witch magic amplified Marcus's vampire strength, while her retained human emotional connections provided strategic insight that pure supernatural instincts might miss during the coming confrontation. The final confrontation crystallized around an ultimatum delivered through the compound's compromised communication system, as Cassandra Blackthorn's voice announced that all supernatural factions would convene at the ancient cathedral where vampire politics had been conducted for centuries, the underground chambers providing neutral ground where Arya's fate could be decided according to laws older than human civilization. The Judgment Day deadline imposed by the full moon rising in 3 nights meant that every supernatural being with claims on the Bridgeborn child would gather in one location for the first time since the prophetic warnings had begun circulating through hidden communities across multiple continents. Elena understood that this convergence represented both their greatest danger and their only opportunity to establish Arya's right to exist without becoming a pawn in supernatural politics that could consume her childhood and twist her prophesied abilities toward serving agendas that had nothing to do with her actual welfare. Marcus began coordinating defensive preparations that combined modern security technology with ancient vampire military strategy, his forces establishing secure transportation routes to the cathedral, while Elena used her awakened magical abilities to create protective wards that would shield their family during the most dangerous political gathering in supernatural history. The revelation of Victor's master plan came through intercepted communications that Elena's enhanced witch senses detected while monitoring supernatural activity throughout the metropolitan area, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone whose long-term strategy was finally reaching its culmination. Victor had been orchestrating the entire supernatural crisis from the beginning, using Arya's prophesied birth as catalyst for conflicts designed to eliminate Marcus's territorial authority and establish his own claim to leadership over all North American vampire houses. The werewolf alliances, the government interference, even the witch coven mobilizations had been manipulated through carefully placed agents who fed intelligence to faction leaders while steering their responses toward courses that served Victor's ultimate ambition. Elena felt rage building in her chest as she understood how their family's private joy had been transformed into a weapon against Marcus's political position. Their daughter's existence cynically exploited by vampires whose hunger for power exceeded their respect for the prophetic significance of her birth. Marcus's expression darkened with centuries of accumulated fury as he realized that Victor's betrayal extended beyond simple political rivalry into the realm of cosmic manipulation that threatened not just their family, but the supernatural world's potential unity that Arya represented. The cathedral preparations took on desperate urgency as Marcus and Elena worked together to establish defensive positions that could protect their daughter while allowing them to participate in political negotiations that would determine the future of supernatural civilization. Elena's magical abilities proved crucial for creating ward networks that could deflect attacks from multiple supernatural species simultaneously, while her vampire-enhanced senses provided early warning of approaching threats that even Marcus's experience might miss. Their combined power created defensive synergies that neither could achieve alone. Vampire strength amplified by witch magic, while human emotional intelligence guided tactical decisions that pure predatory instincts might miscalculate during the heat of supernatural combat. The true scope of Arya's manifesting abilities became apparent during their final preparations as the 3-week-old infant demonstrated power that defied every assumption supernatural science had made about hybrid development timelines. Her presence began suppressing supernatural abilities within an expanding radius that grew stronger as the full moon approached, vampire-enhanced senses dulling to human normal, while werewolf pack coordination dissolved into individual confusion and witch magical workings simply failed to function properly in her immediate vicinity. Elena watched in wonder and terror as their daughter's innocent existence projected neutrality fields that made everyone equally vulnerable, stripping away supernatural advantages that various factions had planned to leverage during the cathedral confrontation. Marcus realized that Arya's ability to suppress supernatural powers could either serve as the ultimate protection during political negotiations or become the greatest liability if enemies decided that eliminating her was preferable to risking their own power reduction in her presence. The cathedral convergence began 3 hours before midnight as supernatural factions arrived through transportation networks that had been established centuries ago for exactly these kinds of crisis gatherings. the underground chambers filling with beings whose presence represented every major supernatural species, and most minor ones as well. Elena descended stone steps worn smooth by millennia of vampire feet, while carrying Arya in protective wrappings that shielded the infant from the overwhelming supernatural emanations radiating from assembled faction representatives who had traveled across continents to witness or influence the judgment that could reshape their hidden world. Marcus walked beside them, wearing formal attire that marked his status as petitioner rather than territorial ruler, his political authority temporarily suspended, while supernatural law determined whether his daughter deserved protection or elimination according to ancient precedents carved in blood and tradition. The cathedral's Gothic architecture provided dramatic backdrop for proceedings that combined medieval ceremony with modern communication technology, allowing supernatural lords from around the world to participate through holographic projection while maintaining the ritual significance that legitimized their collective authority. Elena felt her enhanced senses cataloging threats and potential allies as faction representatives took their assigned positions according to protocols that had governed supernatural politics since before human civilization learned to write, each group maintaining careful distances that reflected centuries of accumulated grievances and territorial disputes. Victor Dracul entered the cathedral like conquering royalty, his entourage including werewolf alphas whose presence violated ancient taboos against cross-species political cooperation, while his confident bearing suggested someone whose victory was already assured through careful preparation and superior strategy. Marcus felt ancient rivalries awakening as Victor's eyes met his across the cathedral's central space, their enmity representing not just personal conflict, but fundamental disagreements about how supernatural society should evolve in response to changing human civilization and the prophetic challenges that Arya's birth had introduced. Elena and Marcus presented their case with eloquence born from desperate love and enhanced by supernatural charisma that made their words carry emotional weight beyond mere political argument, their voices echoing through the cathedral as they argued that Arya represented evolution rather than contamination, unity rather than destruction, hope rather than the threat that faction leaders feared she might become. Their presentation emphasized the bridge-born child's potential to heal ancient wounds between supernatural species while establishing new precedents that could guide their hidden civilization through challenges that traditional approaches had proven inadequate to address. Victor's response carried the weight of aristocratic tradition as he argued that hybrid children threatened the genetic purity that had allowed vampires to survive human persecution for thousands of years. His rhetoric painting Marcus and Elena as dangerous radicals whose emotional attachment to their offspring blinded them to the existential risks that mixing supernatural bloodlines could create. The formal challenge came with ritual precision as Victor invoked ancient combat laws that allowed territorial disputes to be resolved through personal combat between rival leaders, his declaration transforming the political gathering into something far more primitive and direct than modern supernatural diplomacy typically allowed. Marcus accepted the challenge, knowing that refusal would mean automatic forfeiture of any claim to protect his daughter, the combat's outcome determining not just leadership of North American vampire territories, but the right to decide Arya's ultimate fate, according to whichever vision of supernatural society proved stronger in ritual conflict. Elena's new abilities proved crucial as she projected protective barriers around their daughter, while simultaneously amplifying Marcus's supernatural capabilities through magical workings that drew power from the cathedral's ancient consecration and focused it through bloodline connections that predated vampire political structures. The battle itself combined traditional vampire combat techniques with strategic innovations that reflected centuries of accumulated experience and supernatural evolution, each combatant drawing upon different aspects of vampire heritage, while their conflict played out before an audience whose judgment would determine the future direction of supernatural civilization for generations to come. The surprising twist came as Lucian Morningstar emerged from shadows deeper than physical law allowed, his ancient presence silencing the cathedral, as he revealed that the entire crisis had been orchestrated as a test of Marcus's worthiness to guide supernatural society through the challenges that Arya's prophetic role would inevitably create. The real threat was not supernatural politics, but an ancient vampire hunting organization that had been manipulating faction conflicts from behind the scenes, their goal being the exposure and destruction of the hidden world that had coexisted with humanity since the dawn of recorded history. The aftermath of Victor's defeat settled over the cathedral like dawn breaking through centuries of accumulated shadow, his broken form carried away by loyal followers who understood that banishment to his European territories represented mercy rather than justice for crimes against supernatural law that traditionally demanded execution. Cassandra Blackthorn's voice echoed through the ancient chambers as she formally announced the Vampire Council's unanimous decision to recognize Arya as the first acknowledged hybrid heir in recorded supernatural history, her words carrying legal weight that would reshape political precedents for generations to come. Victor's supporters retreated with sullen acceptance of their leader's humiliation, their territorial ambitions temporarily thwarted, but not permanently destroyed, as they understood that exile meant opportunity to rebuild power bases beyond the reach of Marcus's expanding influence. Elena held their sleeping daughter as supernatural delegates approached with formal acknowledgments that transformed Arya from political problem into recognized heir, whose mixed heritage would be protected rather than persecuted by the ancient laws that had previously demanded hybrid elimination. The ceremony that followed combined vampire blood oaths with witch blessing rituals, creating unprecedented legal frameworks that established Arya's right to exist while binding multiple supernatural species to her protection through contractual obligations that could not be broken without triggering collective supernatural war. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic responsibility lifting from his shoulders as faction representatives formally agreed to cease hostilities against his family in exchange for territorial concessions and political accommodations that redistributed power among supernatural houses, while maintaining the delicate balances that kept their hidden world secret from human discovery. The remarriage ceremony took place in the cathedral's central chamber, where Marcus and Elena's conflict had been resolved, their vows spoken before witnesses whose attendance represented every major supernatural faction and most minor ones as well. Elena's transformation allowed their bond to transcend the limitations that had originally driven them apart, vampire and witch magic, combining with retained human emotional connections to create partnership that bridged multiple supernatural heritage lines without sacrificing the love that had brought them together, despite ancient laws claiming their union was impossible. Marcus spoke vows that bound his soul across vampire and human traditions, while Elena's responses carried witch magical workings that sealed their commitment through mystical channels that would endure beyond the physical lifespans that even supernatural immortality could guarantee. Their marriage established legal precedents for supernatural and human unions that previous law had forbidden, creating frameworks that other mixed couples could follow without facing the persecution that had driven Elena into hiding during her pregnancy. The witnesses included beings whose attendance would have been unthinkable before Arya's birth, forced ancient enemies to choose between cooperation and mutual destruction. Werewolf alphas standing beside vampire lords, while witch coven leaders shared ceremonial space with fallen angels who had not manifested in human presence for centuries. The sanctuary they established rose from the ruins of Marcus's compromised compound, its architecture designed to accommodate families whose children carried mixed supernatural heritage while providing security that could protect them from factions that might view genetic diversity as contamination rather than evolution. Elena's architectural input ensured that the buildings reflected human domestic needs, while Marcus's security expertise created defensive capabilities that could repel attacks from any known supernatural threat without appearing fortress-like to casual human observation. The complex included medical facilities equipped to handle hybrid physiology, educational resources that could nurture developing supernatural abilities, and residential spaces where mixed families could raise their children without hiding their true natures or fearing persecution from either human or supernatural authorities. Arya's nursery occupied the building's highest floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided panoramic views of the city sprawling below, while specialized systems monitored her developing abilities and adjusted environmental conditions to support her unique physiological requirements. Elena and Marcus established policies that welcomed other supernatural and human couples while maintaining security protocols that protected residents from external threats and internal conflicts that could arise when ancient enemies were forced to coexist in proximity. The sanctuary's influence began extending throughout the metropolitan area as Arya's presence projected calming emanations that reduced supernatural conflict across territorial boundaries that had previously been sources of constant friction between vampire houses, werewolf packs, and witch covens. Marcus documented decreasing incidents of supernatural violence, while Elena's research confirmed that Arya's ability to suppress aggressive instincts was growing stronger with each week of development. Her infant innocence, somehow broadcasting peace through channels that bypassed conscious thought and influenced genetic memory, encoded in every supernatural being's DNA. The quiet moments became precious refuges from cosmic responsibility as Marcus and Elena took turns sitting beside their daughter's crib during the peaceful hours when political obligations temporarily released their grip on family time that had been sacrificed to supernatural crisis management. Elena's transformation had granted her enhanced perception that revealed details invisible to human senses, while retaining emotional connections that allowed her to appreciate simple pleasures that pure supernatural beings often lost in their pursuit of power and immortality. Marcus found himself experiencing wonder that he had thought lost to centuries of vampire cynicism as he watched their daughter's expressions shift through dreams that might contain prophetic visions or simple infant imagination processing the overwhelming sensory input of existing as a bridge between multiple supernatural worlds. The evening revelations came during one of these quiet vigils, as moonlight streamed through the nursery windows and illuminated Arya's sleeping form with ethereal radiance that seemed to respond to her presence rather than simply reflecting off her skin. Elena noticed first that their daughter's eyes reflected not just the silver gleam that marked vampire heritage or the golden glow that indicated witch bloodline activation, but something else entirely that pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. Marcus's enhanced vision detected energy patterns that defied every supernatural classification system he had studied across 3 centuries of vampire existence. Power signatures that suggested Arya's abilities extended beyond the bridge-born prophecies into realms that neither vampire science nor witch mysticism had adequate frameworks to understand. The mysterious letter arrived through channels that bypassed every security system protecting their sanctuary, its appearance on Elena's desk raising questions about delivery methods that could penetrate supernatural defenses without triggering any detection protocols that should have registered unknown intrusion attempts. The parchment itself felt ancient beneath their fingers, while the writing appeared to shift between alphabets that represented multiple supernatural languages, its message becoming clear only when both Marcus and Elena read it simultaneously, as if requiring combined vampire and witch perception to decode its meaning fully. An ancient order claimed responsibility for monitoring hybrid births worldwide, their records indicating that other children with mixed supernatural heritage had been born in locations spanning 6 continents, their abilities manifesting according to patterns that suggested coordinated emergence rather than random genetic coincidence. The letter spoke of a gathering planned for Arya's first birthday when the bridge-born children would meet their sister and begin training for roles that extended far beyond anything their parents had imagined possible, their combined abilities potentially reshaping not just supernatural civilization, but the fundamental relationship between hidden and human worlds. Elena felt her heart racing with maternal anxiety as she understood that their daughter's cosmic significance was only beginning to unfold, that the peace they had fought to establish represented merely the first chapter in a story that would span generations and reshape the basic structure of reality as both supernatural and human beings understood it. Marcus recognized the seal impressed in wax at the letter's bottom as belonging to an organization that predated vampire civilization by millennia. Their existence whispered about in legends that most supernatural beings dismissed as mythology, but which apparently maintained active operations in the modern world. The final image that would haunt their dreams came as baby Arya stirred in response to their emotional turmoil, her small hand reaching toward the moonlight streaming through her window, with innocent curiosity that triggered manifestations of power beyond anything they had yet witnessed. Her tiny fingers glowed with energy that made the reinforced glass sing like crystal chimes, harmonics that registered on frequencies extending beyond normal hearing, while her touch seemed to bend light itself into patterns that spoke directly to the soul without requiring sensory interpretation. Marcus and Elena stood together watching their daughter reach for mysteries that only she could perceive, understanding that their love had created something far greater than a family, but infinitely more precious than cosmic significance could ever measure. The city stretched below them in all directions, while supernatural beings throughout the metropolitan area felt the subtle influence of the bridge-born child, whose very existence was gradually transforming ancient hatreds into possibilities for cooperation that had never existed before in recorded supernatural history. Elena's transformation had made her worthy companion for the challenges ahead, while Marcus's evolution from isolated ruler to protective father had prepared him for responsibilities that extended far beyond territorial vampire politics into realms where love and power would determine the future of multiple species. Arya represented hope incarnate as she slept peacefully in her sanctuary nursery, her presence promising that the next generation might finally achieve the unity that had eluded supernatural civilization for thousands of years, while her developing abilities suggested that the bridge-born prophecy was only the beginning of transformations that would reshape the world itself. The glass continued singing its crystal song as moonlight and infant magic combined to create harmonies that echoed through dimensions beyond normal perception, carrying messages of possibility and change to beings who had been waiting for centuries to hear that the ancient divisions between supernatural and human worlds were finally beginning to heal through the innocent touch of a child whose existence proved that love could indeed transcend every law that tradition and prejudice had ever carved in stone.